As I lop through your village, I plunder and pillage, taking all the booty for my pagan tribe.
Larpers of oblivion, LARPing knights, a mage, a wizard, and a witch mage. LARPing knights, LARPers of the round table.
I was gonna sing a whole song, but I can't hear the metal. Let me try to play the metal at the same time. LARPing knights, lords of the round table. LARPing knights, pagans made of hair metal. LARPing knights, K-N-I-G-T-H-S, not N-I-G-T-H-S. LARPing knights, pagans of the round table. Swords from oblivion, swords with magical powers that glow, swords that strike your soul. This song is not good. The metal. I did have an idea though. Metal. We're gonna take on the pagans. I want to sing the song if I can get it right. Is it still playing? I can't tell. Anyway, welcome. LARPers of the round table, hair metal knights, a wizard, a mage, and a winch mage too. LARPing knights. Let's take down some paganism, dog. It would be really funny, but I can't figure out how to listen to the song as the same. All right, let me see if I can play the song at the same time. But now it won't be funny because I don't have the dumb wig on. Let's see. All right, let me play the metal song. All right, pause that. LARPing knights, hair metal on the round table. LARPing knights, a warrior, wizard, and a winch mage too. I just made up a new character, a winch mage. She's a pagan medieval thought.
The winch mage. I'm gonna steal all me winch mages for myself. Bring it on, Christian cuck.
Christian cucks, cowering in fear from the swords. Christian cucks, full of temptation. Christian cucks.
Christian, feel the edge of my blade. I run through your village, and I pillage poor Christian cuck. You feel like Donald Duck as I slice through your bones. I eat your flesh, cannibalism on an altar of stones.
That was a pretty good rhyme. that was some good freestyle right there.
Wizard, warrior, and winch mage, as we pillage through your village. Give me more hit points. Metal gives me hit points. LARPing, Renaissance Fair. Blah. Dude, did you ever notice a sword is an inverted cross? That is so hair metal, pagan. Wizards and warriors, gather around my staff.
Uh-oh. I'm gonna get flagged. Anyway, welcome.
Gay of Thrones. The Gay of Thrones, young liege. Bend over, young liege, and learn the pagan ways.
Anyway, welcome. No, I'm not gonna clean my countertop. Clean your mouth out. You go wash your mouth out. You heard techno? It's not techno, it's a fart song. I was gonna use it in one of the dumb videos. See? See? Damn, son. Wolfpack, rise up. All right. That wig drives my nose crazy. What are we doing? We're doing Aristotle. We're going to talk about this debate as we fool around. Super chats are welcome. We're going to cover Aristotle in some pretty good depth here, and the pagan challenge from our opponent last night. And I'm really sorry that our Discord connection was so shitty last night. We're not ready yet. We're gonna let people roll in because I'm a little early. I know I'm always late. Today I'm a little early. Pop, lock, and bang it. Pop, lock, and head, bang it. Pop, lock, and head, bang it. Pop, lock, and head, bang it.
Gather around my stiff sword, young liege. For tonight we raid the Christian village in honor of Fortan, god of all made-up gods. Fortan! Young liege, bend over. I have manly things to teach you of the ancient ways.
Wizards and warriors, wenches, mages, and wench mage too. Wizards and warriors. Uh-oh, I'm feeling the vibe now. I'm getting it. I'm getting the rhythm. Wizards and warriors, titties and wench mages too.
Wizards and warriors, titties and wench mage, titties and wench mage, titties and wench mage, wizards and warriors. Teaching all the young lieges all of the mysteries. Bend over and learn the mysteries.
Ghouls and goblins. $106. Come on now. Where is everybody? Let's get this party started. Young Liege, dude, that's a great rapper name.
Winch mage.
All right, here we go. Wizards and Kangs and shit. Don't believe in Thule? Var's got a short butt, it's gonna take you to school. Call me Odin One Kenobi. The Steve Brule of Thule. Feeding all my pagans gruel, while all them Christ cucks drool. Ain't it cool? Whoa, Tan. Whoa, Tan. Oh, damn. Oh, damn. Bog Lord Dave. Living in a cave. Charles Martel. Pagan as hell. Franco-Merovingian heathen core holy behemoths. What rhymes with Varg? Whoa, Tan, damn. A Satru or a Pikachu? A Satru or a Pikachu? Whoa, damn, son. Whoa, damn, son. Oh. All right. We're almost there. Got a couple more minutes before it actually starts. Y'all want to hear that metal song again? Okay. Everybody likes this metal song.
Ain't nothing but a hole. Where my demons at? Where my demons at? Bend over, Christian cuck. I have something to teach you. Christian, you taste like soy.
All right, that's enough of that mess. All right. That's just some royalty-free Viking pagan metal. Henrik's going to come after me after this. He's going to try to kill me. There's going to be a fatwa from Henrik and an army, a tribe of, a whole tribe's going to come after me, come cut my head off with an axe. They ain't even going to ask a question. Just going to ask my head. Let's see. Thank you. Super chat's rolling in. We're going to get started. If you missed the first 10 minutes of complete nonsense, I really should have put that into more of a planned musical presentation because it could have been pretty funny. But it's okay. All right, let's talk about last night's really lengthy debate. It was good. I wish that the sound had been... Well, the sound was fine. It was that the internet was glitching in and out. So we didn't really have a presentation that makes a whole lot of sense after the second hour mark. After hour 2 is when it really starts going downhill. You can kind of make out the majority of the arguments. I was asking people today what they thought, and they felt like it was, I still came out on top. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but whether or not you can really make out the arguments I'm making, because every time I said a sentence, the last part of the sentence was cut off because Discord was acting weird. So, any debate that I do is posted at the website. It's posted on all my social medias. So if you follow my website or any of the social medias, you will see last night's debate posted. So, yes, I'll add it to the description, unless Joe the Boomer has made the debate behind a paywall. I don't know if he's done that or not. I don't know. So, but because a lot of people couldn't even hear the debate, that's why we're doing this. So, and hopefully this won't take too long because I'm not going to rehash the entire thing. It was so kind of arduous and a lot of circular stuff and a lot of rehashing the same argument multiple times over. It was worth it, but it was very draining. So if we think about the Aristotelian perspective, we want, and he was roughly, Aristotelian. Yeah, the audio on Discord was pathetic, dude. I mean, from now on, we'll have to do this on my channel because I'm not going to waste 3-hour debate with a bunch of audio nonsense. And then if he wants to have it on his channel, he can put it up. Yeah, I cut out every 5 seconds after 2 hours. It was pitiful. All right, so what we're going to see in this is the similarity between the pagan conception, the Aristotelian conception, and ironically, when I listened to the previous discussions that Tweetathon had on that Daily Brat, they had discussed all of the similarities between Aristotle and the Thomists that were on there. And yeah, that's kind of the thrust of the argument I've been making for a long time, isn't it? So what I did was I kind of just listed all of these ideas, and I only got to about half of them in the debate because it ended up being so wordy and circular. But what we want to keep in mind is there's some basic principles that are going to be true in most of the pagan, most of the philosophic, and most of the Far Eastern worldviews. Now, I believe that this is still true for Islam and even arguably Judaism. But we're going to set aside the monotheistic views for the time being, and we want to focus on again the pagan conceptions, the Platonic, Neoplatonic, Aristotelian, the Greek conceptions, and the Far Eastern conceptions, because basically they're all monistic. And I think when you have a system that's monistic, you're going to be in the same dilemmas. And this is why we can use arguments like critiquing absolute divine simplicity, the essence energy distinction. Those arguments are still applicable to these other religions as well. Now, that's a little more obtuse, perhaps, and there are simpler ways to critique those worldviews as well. Man, it's getting hot up in here. Dancing and playing metal. I invoke demons or something. Let me turn the air conditioner on. I'll be right back. And so, yeah, the furry demons were... The furry demons that run Discord were messing with my audio chat. I got his my notes on his worldview too. Okay, so basically, yeah. And this is going to be a half and half talk. Now, there is an old talk that I did for subscribers, which is a pretty lengthy discussion of Aristotle. We'll be touching on some of that material, but the majority of this material is new and is specific to this guy and the worldview that he presented, because it's kind of piecemeal. Very similar to Boglord Dave and his approach. And, most of the people that are in these perspectives, that's what's going on. It's a piecemeal thing that they're kind of just putting together. Now, they don't see that as problematic, but I think it is pretty evident that the root of all this, as we'll see connected to the position of monism, is that these positions end up still relativistic. That's the pattern that we tend to see in these pagan guys. Again, over and over and over. The positions become cafeteria-style subjective things that some guys just kind of piecing together. And ironically, again, if we set aside Asatru and the different pagan movements, if we think about other religious movements in our last century, when we think about all the people, for example, that studied under Crowley, what did they do? Not all of them, but many of them. Well, they went out and started their own religion, right? So what did Gerald Gardner do? He creates Wicca, and he creates it as a blend of Druidism and all this jibber jabber that he learned from Crowley and all this kind of stuff. Other guys, L. Ron Hubbard, he goes through the ranks of the Crowley school, goes out, starts his own cult. A lot of these guys have this pattern. Now, I'm not saying that all the pagan guys are the equivalent of Gerald Gardner or Crowley or L. Ron Hubbard. I'm just making the association, the connection of the fact that these are people who just kind of try to piece it together. And he says, well, yeah, I'm a reconstructionist. In other words, I'm reconstructing what the ancient rites must be. And what we tend to see is that this is a fool's enterprise. I remember when I was looking into orthodoxy initially, and I was really trying to grapple with all the criticisms of Neoplatonism. This is Neoplatonism. You're Neoplatonic. And what about the similarities between Augustine's doctrine of the filioque and Plotinus's discussion of the dyad and the triad, and how the third principle between the two is love? And yes, Augustine absolutely got that from Plotinus. It's in the Aeneads. I think it's Aeneid 5 off the top of my head. Now, initially, this is kind of a plausible. You start to think, well, yeah, there's a lot of similarities there, right? And it's kind of it's beyond the zeitgeist tier of stuff, but it's in that vein of stuff, right? So you're a little more. It's more academic than the basic bitch zeitgeist crap. And so you're wondering, well, how do we distinguish Neoplatonism from what Dionysius talks about in the divine names? How do we distinguish Neoplatonism from the Trinity and the way that the Cappadocians formulate it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And what you eventually come to realize, if you go down, I think, hopefully the right path, the path that I think is right, is that there's not really a Neoplatonic system. Okay, this is an assumption that's often made on the part of scholars, but then when you realize that, at the end of the 19th century, scholars were kind of arguing this Christianity is Neoplatonism. They don't believe that anymore. That's kind of been ditched in scholarship. It's older scholarship that was trying to make that argument about Christianity being Neoplatonic, but you see that, for example, reflected in Nietzsche's day, where he says it's just another version of Platonism. And certainly many of the Christians over the years, especially in the West, have been absolutely Platonic, especially a lot of the Calvinists and the Thomists, no doubt about that. But what you realize is that between Iamblichus and between Plotinus, Neoplatonism is two completely different approaches. Is it me mentally recognizing these things? Or is it a bunch of ritual magic leading to theurgy? You see, which one's the real Neoplatonism? And so and it's the same thing in the rites of the constructed, made-up religions of paganism or any other cult. It's completely subjective. It is not historically authenticated. And just because something's old doesn't mean it's true. Even if you could reconstruct it, so what? Doesn't mean it's true. I mean, for example, if the Rosetta Stone was the means by which hieroglyphics were deciphered, then the gobbledygook of Masonry and their Egyptology before the Rosetta Stone probably is wrong in a lot of areas, don't you think? Yeah, exactly. So what you start to realize, and this is what I realize when you get to a certain point in the researching maybe like esoteric guys, hermeticists, and you realize, oh, wait a minute, like Manly P. Hall's big book, he's just piecing together things from comparative religion. And they're just looking for similarities. And I'm not saying you can't find similarities, but what I'm saying is that a lot of these cult leaders, they're just making it up, dude. They're making it up as they go. They're starting their own shit. Right? They're not really passing down mysteries. There might be some truths and mysteries contained in what they're constructing, but they're not the part of some lineage of the true Druidic tradition. Get that out of here. Bullshit. Because there's a lot more about the ancient world that we don't know than we do know. Now, that doesn't mean that there's absolutely no traditions that are passed down. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the resurgence of paganism, I don't believe, and we're going to see this now all over. This is what all these people are they're going to go into it just like sheep. They're being primed for this because of the collapse of evangelicalism, the collapse of Roman Catholicism. They're all just piling into neo-paganism. But let's talk about whether or not logic and reason and philosophy can actually coincide with paganism and all this stuff. Because I don't think it can. I think actually we'll find that they are self-refuting and inconsistent. So let's look at the basic outline of what the dude last night said. And I'm not intentionally trying to misrepresent him. If I misstate him, I'm sure we'll have a future interaction. He can correct me. But what I understood him to be saying is that he starts with this metaphysical assumption that it's not exactly clear where he started, and that's why I kept pressing him on this, because he says, well, we look out at the world and we see that there was at one time a one. There was a hyperousia, a beyond being, super existence, a monad, a monism, some kind of great unity. And then it split into the dyad. Okay, this is what all the ancient Greeks taught, basically. Pythagorean, Plato, right? The dyad then is the beginning of multiplicity. And then the dyad kind of splits into all of the particulars of our experience that we see out there in the world, all the hylomorphic matter form instantiations or particulars out there. Now, let me see if he said anything else. Theology, then, he says, is understanding the gods and the principles behind things. There is the good and there is what ought to be, and these are derived from reasoning about these principles, which he said were independent but present in this world. And ultimately they derive from the one in the monad world, in the perfect unity. But also, somehow, there are many unmoved movers. So let's see, I'm looking at my notes on his view. The lesser humans have a lesser morality. I'm not sure what he meant by that, and so this is what he's derived from reading 7th century BC to 3rd century BC Greek and Confucian philosophy. Okay, so it's kind of a little bit of Aristotle and a little bit of the Far Eastern stuff and a little bit of Plato, because he said he believes in divine ideas. There's no mind for these ideas, so that doesn't even make any sense. But he says there's ideas that are independent of material form and existence. And he says that we need to look to Parmenides. So go back to the pre-Socratics and the Ionians and look to Parmenides. Parmenides taught us that everything that is will always be. And again, the logical conclusion of that is that change is illusory. I mean, if the here and the now is eternal and it's always just going to be happening again and again and again, then doesn't it stand to reason that the alterations in time and space that we experience, that they are illusory? Because it means that every single point in time is eternal. So this is really just a deifying of the here and the now, right? This is all the monistic systems can either be dualistic and nonsensical or monistic and nonsensical. They can collapse either way. This is always true of any monistic system. And he says his system is monistic. It's monism. It's all as one. The fundamental unifying aspect of all reality, the fundamental structure of all reality, or the ultimate reality is just one. All things that are. So he starts his system off with this statement: everything is or isn't doesn't make sense, so therefore everything is. Okay, this is number one. This is not a coherent starting point like he thinks. He thinks a starting point is theory neutral, that he can just start with this reasoned out assumption of what existence and being and all things are. No, you can't. I'm not saying you can never have a starting point. I'm pointing out that that is not the neutral starting point that you think it is. And so that was about 40 minutes of stressing that point, and I don't think that he ever grasped it. Or if he did, I don't know. Then when we started again to discuss time and change, and then when we moved into the last part of the debate where my audio was cutting out pretty heavy, and I was asking him how he came to these conclusions and how he had epistemic certainty about all these claims. How did he go from these general instantiations to universals, from the particular to the universal, which is, again, a big problem in the Aristotelian system. I don't think we got a coherent answer. I think what we got was him saying, well, I experienced it. Let me just go back to my individual personal experience, and I look out and I see change, so change is real, but it's not ultimate. The debate is, everything I do is on my website or on my social media. So the debate was last night. It'll be linked in the thing if Joe the Boomer hasn't made it. It was on the Daily Brat. If Joe the Boomer hasn't made it behind a paywall. All right, so let's start with these things that he's laid out, and let's critique them. Now, again, monistic systems, and this is why I kept hammering this home, and he didn't get it and he didn't answer it. Any fundamental critique from the time of the pre-Socratics and the Ionians up through Plato, and it still applies to Aristotle too, even though Aristotle tried to solve this problem in Plato, and it's applicable to all the Far Eastern monistic views, is the fact that in this realm of the ideal, in this realm of the one and of the monad, if everything is perfectly simple and unified, then it shares no similarity or likeness to this realm. Okay? But if we think about Plato, for example, Plato wanted the world that we inhabit to be a kind of a rough phantasm mirror of that realm. Right? The ideas in that realm are reflected into this realm in pale ways. So all the chairs that you see are pale, lesser being instantiations of the ultimate chairness that exists in the realm of the ideas. Now, there's a problem right off from the outset. If the one is absolutely simple, then there aren't multiple different forms within it. And again, this is what I critiqued in Thomism to classical theists, because it's true, because they adopt absolute divine simplicity. And they adopt the actus purus view. Now, there can't be multiple ideas and a real distinction in an absolute unity of this nature, of this kind. But if you're going to say that all the things that exist in this realm are grounded in the ideas in that realm, in the monad, out there in the one, in the great unity, in the great beyond, whatever, wherever you locate it, doesn't matter, then you need there to be multiple different things. Because if there's not, then what you end up having to say is that, in fact, distinctions themselves are all also illusory. Because if there's not a form of a chair and a form of a man in the one, because that's where you've said it's located, that's where it's in, the ideas are in the form. By the way, how do ideas subsist in an impersonal, abstract realm? That doesn't make any sense, because the word idea, the whole conception of idea, is itself analogous to a mind having ideas. So it's retarded from the outset. But setting that aside, if there's not a separate form of man and a separate form of chair in the great one, then it can't be the ground of your epistemic certitude in this world. This is the fundamental problem of all monistic systems, because they try to relate that world to this world, and it doesn't work, because this world is in perpetual flux and change and is constituted by many, many, many different distinct things. There are many particulars everywhere in this world. Many, many, many distinctions. And what we see is that when we try to ground it in this abstract nonsense thing, what happens is that all, again, dissolves. What seemed like it might be a coherent basis, right? Basically what Plato says, in fact, does not work. It completely dissolves. Now, I'm not just making Aristotle's third man argument. That's not what I'm saying. Don't misunderstand me. This is not basic bitch stuff. We're beyond that. What I'm saying is that there's an even better critique. And ultimately, it applies to Aristotle too, because Aristotle doesn't actually ever get from the particulars to the universal. It doesn't make any sense to say, well, there's universals, but they're just in every particular. And that's why later down the road, the empiricist philosophers who followed that train of thought out consistently rejected universals and became nominalists. They said, yeah, exactly. If we're going to start with empirical sense data, guess what? We don't ever actually empirically sense a universal. We sense this event, this event, this event, this event, or this collection of matter, this collection of matter, this collection of matter. That's not getting you to a universal. If you believe in empiricism, and the Aristotelian system, although it is a realist system, is certainly more empirical than the a priori speculative Platonic view. But it doesn't matter, because he grounded his essences, his ideas, his forms, the divine idea, or the ideas, as he called them, which have an independent existence. He grounded them, as I understood, in relationship to the unmoved movers, which exist in the realm of, I guess, lower degree particularity. And he said, aha, that's a good question. When I asked him, is there one unmoved mover or 55? Because Aristotle contradicts himself, and he admitted Aristotle contradicts, and says both in metaphysics that there are 55 movers, and also on the celestial heavens he speaks of one unmoved mover. Well, this is a problem with the one and the many. Okay, and you can't solve it by saying that there's 55 different unmoved movers. Oh wait, there's only one unmoved mover. So he didn't really give an answer to that. He kind of spoke early on in the debate about the different principles that are unmoved movers, and then later when I really honed in on that, he said, "Oh well, no, there's just one unmoved mover." So that was a pretty devastating blow, I would say, to his argument. And it really illustrates the higher level critique and principle that I was making about the one and the many. You're always going to have a dialectic in your system between one and many when you start with this absolutely simple, impersonal, unknown, unknowable monad and super essential oneness, right? Which is, by the way, hyperousia, beyond being, apeiron, beyond being, wholly other. If it's wholly other and wholly beyond being, in your view, then it doesn't relate to the many particularities. It doesn't act as a Platonic grounding for the many, many, many particularities and particulars that we experience in this world. And then, of course, I made, moving beyond that, the point about any of those systems, whether it's the pre-Socratics, the Ionians, whether it's Plato, or whether it's Far Eastern thought, is that if you follow that through, then it leads to the logical conclusion that in this world, and he even appealed to Parmenides, and I said, well, if you have a legitimate defense of Parmenides, I'm willing to hear it. But he just said, no, I mean, I agree with Parmenides, but you're just giving a basic bitch critique of Parmenides. Okay, I said, so defend Parmenides then, because if everything that exists is pure permanence, truly speaking, and the world that we experience is flux and change, doesn't it stand to reason that the world of flux and change isn't really real? So the Far Eastern philosophies, Buddhism, Hindu, whatever, that follow through with that line of reasoning and ultimately come to the conclusion that, oh, wait a minute, yes, this world is like a giant demiurge tricking me. And he even brought that up. He even said, well, how do you know it's not an evil demon tricking you, right? The Descartes critique. And I said, well, first of all, that's really easy to refute, because if that view is true, then it's completely destructive to all rationality and logic and argumentation, period. And so therefore it's not true, because it's so fundamentally destructive to the possibility of reasoning. What? How could that be? Well, let me give you an example. If it is true that everything that I learn in this realm, in this world, is ultimately illusory, and if it's true that there's no change ultimately, then I didn't really progress from a state of not knowing that truth to knowing that truth. And when I did possess from a state of being of not knowing that truth to then knowing this supposed great truth, then isn't that also part of the great illusion? Why, yes, it is. So this solipsistic, Gnostic nonsense view is immediately self-destructive, just as self-destructive and stupid as relativism. And I'm sure that our friend Tweetathon would not be a relativist. He would critique that, surely. And then from there, we understand that, guess what? These pagan views, the Gnostic view, the ancient Far Eastern view, and the pre-Socratic Platonic view, why, they're all really similar, aren't they? So while all of this apologetic discussion and debate sounds really obtuse and it's really abstract, it's really, really simple. Because the founding points where these systems try to start building are very similar, and they're almost always the same. And it always starts with the individual's reasoning and rationality constructing something that ultimately ends up in pure subjectivism or pure relativism. Every time. And so ultimately now it doesn't matter whether it's the atheist, whether it's the complete rank materialist, or whether it's the dude in your college class who's like, oh, I just saw the Matrix, man, and like, what if we're in a simulation? It's the same thing. Plato's demiurge and Gnosticism. This world is a trick. Got to flee it, flee the body. Same doctrine. Far Eastern religions, you got to like meditate yourself out of existence, destroy your ego, man, and become one with thusness. Same basic argument. Now, he didn't say that. He's like, I don't believe this Hindu style stuff of, trying to destroy your ego or whatever. But it doesn't matter, because at root, all of these positions are monistic. And then they have the problem of relating that world to this world, which becomes a problem of dualism. The perfect ideal world to this world. How does it relate? And we all know Plato's answer to this question, which is retarded and laughable. Well, I guess at one time in our pre-existent eternal lives, in our reincarnate stages back, we were in the ideal realm, and so that's how we're just remembering what was in that perfect realm. No, that's a retarded ad hoc answer, and Aristotle's correct to say no, that's a retarded ad hoc answer. But guess what? Aristotle's smushing of the ideas, of the forms, of the essences, of the universals into the particulars doesn't work either. So Aristotle's right to critique Plato, and his answer is also retarded. So what Aristotle does, guess what? Let me blow your mind. Remember all the arguments about absolute divine simplicity? Well, guess what? Hylomorphism, it just takes all the problems of absolute divine simplicity that we critique in the theology, and it applies them to particular objects. It's smushing the accidents as not really what constitutes the object. It's just smushing the universals into the particulars. And hylomorphism ends up with absolute simplicity for objects. Booyah. And hylomorphism doesn't work for the human body, obviously. It's 100% contradictory to our Christology and to our anthropology, obviously. Now let's get more precise about Aristotle, because he's so lauded and praised by all these people. And by the way, the Thomists today on Twitter, and the Augustinians and the Roman Catholics, they just got St. John of Damascus's book that includes the philosophical chapters. And they're like, ha ha ha, he talks about Aristotle and substance and accidents. We got Jay, we got him. Bro, I've been lecturing on that book for 3 years. Where you been? I knew years ago that's what's in that book. And the reason I did that lecture 3 or 4 years ago is because he doesn't use Aristotle in the same way as Thomas. Because in defense of the Orthodox faith, he teaches the essence-energy distinction from books 1 through 3. And multiple times over, Aquinas rejects the essence-energy distinction. This is not even in debate. Catch up, dudes. It's time to catch up. Any basic Thomistic work will tell you that Thomas Aquinas rejects the essence-energy distinction. Thomas teaches actus purus. That means there's no essence-energy distinction. It's not hard to figure out. You can confuse yourself and get lost in all this stuff, but it's not hard to figure out if Thomists and Roman Catholicism accept or reject the essence-energy distinction. It's not hard to figure that out. And so, guess what? We have plenty of uses for Aristotle. We have plenty of uses for logic. Do you see me here debating all of these atheists and utilizing logic? If I didn't think Aristotle said true things, I wouldn't be utilizing a transcendental argument, which he uses in the Metaphysics. When St. John of Damascus goes through the philosophical chapters and cites Aristotle, he uses a transcendental argument against the sophists. He uses that from Aristotle. I've been here for years citing St. John of Damascus's use of the transcendental argument from Aristotle. Bro, catch up, dude. That's not a gotcha moment. They don't understand that the gotcha moments are actually just making them look goofy, because I've already covered all this for years. Anyway, these are young guys. These are guys who are like 21. They don't know what they're talking about. All right, so let's get into Aristotle, because again, what we want to stress here is that Plato and Aristotle are wrong in a very fundamental way, and Plato and Aristotle are right in insightful ways. Does that make sense? Can we grasp that? So first of all, what we want to understand when we contrast this, we're going to look more in depth at the Aristotelian view as an example here, because again, with this guy, it's a very good bridge between the Thomists and the Pagans, because this guy was interested in Aristotle very heavily, or a good bit of Aristotle. He liked a lot of Aristotle, and Aristotle is the bridge between Hellenism and, Thomistic Roman Catholicism in a big way. And I'm very aware that Aquinas cites Augustine and he cites Dionysius and the divine names many times in the Summa. In fact, I believe he cites Dionysius more than he cites Aristotle. I'm aware of all that. But regardless, it doesn't really matter. That's not what we're here to talk about. Let's critique the Aristotelian perspective, because what we want to see is that Aristotle's system fundamentally is not at all Christian. And the fact that there's similar terms, it doesn't matter. If I say unmoved mover, I say, I believe that the world was started by a first cause and unmoved mover. And you get all excited and you start jumping around. Oh, bro, you believe the same thing we do. We just differ on who it is. And then I say, yeah, the unmoved mover was Satan. Doesn't that really illustrate the absurdity of just because he speaks of the unmoved mover? As if I could, in apologetics, join with a Jehovah's Witness and join with an Arian and join with a Scientology proponent and join with whoever else, it doesn't matter. Islam. Oh, we're all going to argue for the same common God. No, we don't have the same common God. Because we have the triune God, and that's the only God that's ever existed. Not a generic theism that all the religions know about. All right, so position A that we want to talk about that's problematic and contrasts is, once again, because this position that Aristotle would outline fundamentally can't interpret nature correctly. So one reason we can't do natural theology, and why in our theology it's more properly called natural revelation, is because you can't properly interpret the external world, the natural world as it is now, without the doctrine of the fall. Because if you do try to do that, you will come to the conclusion, you will reason to the faulty conclusion, as the deists and the Enlightenment guys did, that whoever constructed this world, if I just look at the natural world, is a psychopath. Because that psychopath has made death and life just as important in the natural world. Yes, natural theology leads directly to atheism, because the God of natural theology is the God of natural rights in the natural world, who naturally has put death into practice to feed on life, and life feeds on death, right? When a body decomposes, out come the microbes and the whatever that feed on the death and the decay. Now, that's not the natural state of things. That's not natural. It's natural in a limited sense. But that's not the way God intended the world to be, because this world is fallen. And the decay and death and destruction that are in the world, any form of death, is a result of Adam's fall. Romans 8 makes this abundantly clear. So again, as I did in the traditional philosophy and metaphysics lectures, I already covered this. We covered why natural theology doesn't work. They don't get it. They can't grasp it. They can't understand that you can't interpret the natural world without the fall. But the doctrine of the fall is presupposing the doctrine of creation. And the doctrine of creation and the fall presuppose revelation, Genesis. So you can't properly interpret the external world without supernatural revelation contained in Genesis, and by extension in the rest of the scriptures. This is why, as Father Staniloy says in Volume 1 of Orthodox Dogmatics, for us there is no natural theology, there's natural revelation. So you can see why Aristotle looks out at the world and he says, well, death is just a natural process. The Seventh Ecumenical Council condemns those who call death a natural process, right? Because the Seventh Ecumenical Council accepts the Trullo Synod decrees, and the canons of Trullo accept the earlier canons that speak of condemning anybody who says that death is a natural process and that death would have happened had not Adam sinned. You have to believe. This is why theistic evolution is impossible in any Christian system. Orthodoxy especially, obviously that's the only one that's truly Christian. You can't believe in theistic evolution because it denies the canons of Trullo, which are accepted at Nicaea too. I've cited this hundreds of times. I get tired of citing this. And every time, and now that I do this, somebody's going to say, where is that? Where is that? Again, I'm going to have to put it on my Twitter again. Pay attention. So death is unnatural. This is fundamental to Orthodox theology. That's why in the harrowing of Hades icon, Christ is destroying death. And you say, well, is it spiritual death or physical death? It's both. Because they're both intertwined. Because man is a whole. He's a holistic being, body, soul, and spirit. And so when we speak of death, it is intermittently linked. It is linked in the body and in the spirit and into all creation. That's why when Adam sinned, as the steward and covenant head of the cosmos, of creation, when he sinned, it affected the entire world, the entire universe. It introduced decay and destruction into the entire universe. And that's why we can't look out at the world as it is now and reason back to a creator. If you listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson, if you go listen to the talks that I did on the Cornelius Hunter book about Darwin's God, I talk about this in depth. And I explain how Neil deGrasse Tyson is right when he says, if you think that the world out there teaches you natural theology, then to me it seems like it teaches a psychopath God. Because the psychopath God necessitates predator and prey relations for life to exist and subsisting to continue. But guess what? that's not the natural state of things. We live in an unnatural state of things because of the fall. So nature and being natural is a very vague and loose term. It's a theory-laden term. It doesn't come to us with uninterpreted brute meaning. It's not a brute fact. We don't know what nature means apart from the rest of some philosophical or theological system. So this is another easy point to contrast Christianity from Aristotelianism or any of the paganisms, is that we're the only position that teaches creation ex nihilo. We're the only position that's going to interpret the world in a certain way, ultimately the correct way, but in a certain way where we see death as an enemy, and where, as a result, death and sin are intimately connected. And thus man's problem is moral. This sets us off against all the other positions, because all those Far Eastern monistic positions, they start with man's problem being metaphysics. They don't start with a sin in the garden that's moral that leads to metaphysical problems and ontological decay in the universe. They start with a metaphysical problem of the one, and somehow movement changed things and it split the one, and then that dyad split into a triad that split into the multiplicity and infinity fractal nonsense, right? Now, I'm not saying fractals aren't true, but that scheme is immediately contrasted with our redemptive scheme. In our scheme, creation is good. It's done ex nihilo, out of nothing. It's not a pre-existent matter that God forms into something. It's not co-eternal with God. History thus is linear, beginning, middle, end. This, by the way, is a presuppositional category for understanding all of experience, beginning, middle, end. No human being experiences the world in reverse. No human being experiences reality from the middle to the beginning to the end. No, we are constituted as beings to experience everything in our lives, beginning, middle, and end. And so you could argue that this means of experiencing the world itself is one of the transcendental categories. In fact, I think Kant himself even argues that that's a transcendental precondition for understanding. Anyway, regardless, the point being is that our view of history is then linear, not cyclical. The world comes to be at a specific point in time. It wasn't eternal. It's not a part of God. It's not an emanation. God freely created. This is why we can't believe in absolute divine simplicity, because that would mean that the action of creating is also co-eternal with God's essence, and thus creating was always eternally an action of God. God eternally created, and then the creation ultimately becomes eternal. It takes on one of the properties of divinity. It takes on an eternal, uncreated state. But creation is not uncreated. That doesn't make any sense. So creation has to be freely done. This is the whole point of the Florovsky essay on Athanasius and Athanasius's arguments with the Arians. You have to make a distinction between God's nature and God's will and counsel. And so ultimately, Father Florovsky demonstrates without any shadow of a doubt that St. Athanasius against the Arians is arguing the essence-energy distinction. That's the whole point. If he's not, then his whole argument with the Arians falls apart. So we see a system then where creation begins. It's ex nihilo. It's not out of God or part of God. It's from nothing, and that doesn't mean that there was nothing and then God and creation came into existence. No, it means that God for all eternity was there, and he would have been there had he not created. But when he created into nothing, we say, just to specify and to set it off against these pagan and eternal return, eternal recurrence type systems, cyclical systems. And again, cyclical history relativizes history. It makes change within history meaningless. And because change within and development within history is meaningless, what we get is the next dialectic that I contrasted in the debate is that of stasis and change. Now, this dialectic is interesting because it's overlooked when we critique absolute divine simplicity and when we understand what Origen taught. So again, we go back to Genesis. Origen is teaching a similar doctrine to Plato and the Platonists, a pagan Gnostic doctrine. He doesn't believe in creation. The Confession of St. Sophronius, accepted at the Sixth Council, extensively condemns Origen for his rejection of Eden and the doctrine of creation. And he allegorizes it, just like all the Darwinists and the theistic evolutionists do. They allegorize Genesis. They allegorize Eden. They say it wasn't real. It was just some mythical, allegorical thing. Well, you're condemned by the Sixth Council for saying what Origen says, right? Because actually, the Sixth Council is very explicit in the Confession of St. Sophronius about the errors of Origen. It's not a general condemnation of Origen's apokatastasis. It's a very specific condemnation of Origen's doctrine of allegorization of Genesis and Eden. That's a heavy pill for a lot of these normie docs to swallow, and they won't swallow it. They will choose anything but what Genesis says. Give me anything but what Scripture actually says. Anything but that. What did we see here? The pride of man. The pride of man of just not submitting to the Scriptures. Whether it's the pagans or whether it's the normie docs, all of them. It's just human pride and autonomy and not wanting to submit to what Scripture says and what all the church fathers taught. And you say, well, yeah, but I found a church father who didn't believe. And it doesn't matter, because by the Sixth Council, it's already settled. You can't pick out one church father who got something wrong and say, well, I don't have to accept that because, right? No, you can't do that. And everybody knows you can't do that. If you could do that, the whole system would be chaos nonsense. It would all collapse. It wouldn't make any sense. Everybody could just, it would be like Protestantism. Like everybody could just pick out which saint that they want to follow. So nature can't be interpreted without understanding the doctrine of creation and the fall. And since we see change in nature, we have a problem of relating this unchanging, eternal, timeless, atemporal realm of impersonal, whatever, essence, to this realm of change and flux. So this is a dialectic between being and becoming. And the church fathers encounter and debate the dialectic between being and becoming. And it's specifically encountered in the encounter with Origen. And this actually, it's St. Maximus. When he corrects Origen, it's St. Maximus that fixes a lot of this, because this Origenistic error kept floating around and it kept popping back up. And if you read St. Maximus, he's very explicit about how to correct and condemn this. And what he says is that, and actually St. Gregory of Nyssa had already done some groundbreaking work in this arena, and he points out that the problem with man and man's fall wasn't being in a perfect state of unity and willing in some way to look to some other created good or some other thing to turn its gaze away, its perfect intellectual gaze away from the one. Okay, in the Origenistic scheme, the pre-eternal, pre-existent souls fell because they willed something other than the one and the good. And so then they fell into being in a created state, and they fell into bodies. This is totally heretical, totally Gnostic, totally Platonic garbage nonsense. Anybody trying to resurrect Origen is either a fool or demonic. All right, so you can't import any of this into Orthodox Christianity. It's nonsense when you really understand the Origenist scheme. So the fall then for Origen is that, and then what happens in redemption is that the mind, the intellect, makes its way back through the created images. It's very Platonic to the one, right? And then when you get back to the one, Origen says, if we have free will, it stands to reason that you can always choose between good and evil. So as a dialectical definition of free will, meaning either the choice between good or evil. And since everybody believes that you do retain free will in the afterlife, you could see Origen's reasoning process here. He says, well, then in the afterlife, if you have free will, then you have to be able to will something other than the supreme essence, the monad. And if you can will something other than the supreme essence monad in the afterlife, in the next life, in eternity, then you can fall again. So he has a weird mix of absolute divine simplicity, but also stressing free will. But again, if you understand that, then you understand that it's actually the Roman Catholics and the Thomists that are inconsistent. Because in the beatific vision doctrine, they want to say that the will is forever focused on the essence of God and seeing all things in the essence of God. But the essence of God is one. It's absolutely simple. And there aren't really many things in it. So there aren't really different things to will. And every church father agrees that free will involves an actual choice. So if there's only one thing in the afterlife, and there's not a real distinction between things because everything is being seen and known through the essence of God, which is total blasphemy. You guys are blasphemous. then again, we're at the problem of absolute divine simplicity, where there's not real distinctions in the one. And I brought this point up to classical theists, and I brought it up in the first time being on the Daily Brap to the Thomists, and I tried to stress this point because this is why beatific vision doctrine is just Platonism. Now, in our view, St. Maximus has a great chapter in the, if you read the selected writings version of St. Maximus, there's a chapter where he talks about seeing God in the afterlife. There's also one of the theological orations of Gregory Nazianzus. He talks about seeing God. So we don't have a problem with seeing God because, as you know, we say that we already see God in this life, and then it becomes the fullness of that in the afterlife. But what these fathers are very clear about is that we're not seeing the essence of God. The seeing of God is seeing directly the energies of God. So there you go. That's the solution. Also, the forms of things, if you want to call them that, the essences, the universals. If you read Ambiguum 7 of St. Maximus, they're uncreated energies. They're not the essence of God. This is where we differ from the Roman Catholics. They're not exemplars in the essence of God. All right. So as we're moving through the pagan system, let's get back to this. The dialectic between stasis and change, between being and becoming, is present in all the systems, just like the dialectic of the one and the many, just like the dialectic of monism and dualism. There's also a dialectic between being and becoming. And these guys laugh and they make fun of talking about dialectics. Are you not aware how prominent this is in the Church Fathers? How constantly they're talking about the heretics being caught up in dialectics? It's in all of them. Athanasius rebukes the Arians for it. Basil rebukes the Eunomians for it. Nyssa rebukes the Eunomians for it. St. Maximus rebukes the Monothelites for it. Nestorius gets rebuked for it because they're obsessed with either-or dialectics. So in our view, and if you read Father Staniloy, if you read Orthodox Dogmatics Volume 1, then you know that he has an awesome chapter on not just the problems of absolute divine simplicity, but the problems of the dialectic between stasis and change. That's why for us the afterlife is different. There's not just stasis. There's real change in the afterlife. Because we're not Platonists, bro. And there's an extensive section where Father Staniloy in Volume 1 just completely annihilates this stupid argument. Now, that's going to be true for Origenism, and it's also true for all the paganisms. So are starting to see how a lot of these systems are the same, because they start with the same errors and problems. So nature can't be interpreted without creation and the fall. Death becomes natural. History becomes cyclical and meaningless and illusory. Ultimately, I would argue, if you're consistent in this system, perfection in this scheme is perfect unity. Why is perfect unity somehow perfection? All these dumb philosophic systems, all the systems based on chain of being, they all have this assumption that perfection is somehow a perfect unity or monad. Well, that kind of introduces a gradation in the Trinity, doesn't it? Yes, it does. But Basil says God is not more one than he is three, and he's not more three than he is one. So there's a perfect balance of the one and the many in the Trinity according to the Eastern Fathers. So we don't want any of this gradations of being. We don't want any of this gradations of nonsense. In God, there is perfect unity and perfect Trinity. Change is not a lesser ontological status. Somebody saying, why don't you do a talk on why death isn't natural? I already did one. It's in the natural theology talk. No Greeks ever taught creation. No Greeks taught creation ex nihilo. No Greeks teach or taught, or ancient philosophers taught, that man's problem is primarily moral. They taught that man's problem is a lack of facts and education. No, that's not man's problem. Do you see that at each point, our system doesn't work with the Greeks? Now, the Greeks might have read Isaiah. They might have read Moses. We don't know. Many church fathers thought maybe they did. Doesn't really matter. Point being is that ours is the true system. And whatever truths they have is from us, dude, not the other way around. Now, if they say something true and they didn't learn it from our system, it's still from us because it's from the logos that they have from the logos of God. All right, so next, as we move up then to history, history for us is not ahistorical and meaningless and a prison to escape from. The God of creation stepped into history. History is meaningful. If you go listen to the talk I did on Genesis versus atheists and pagans, I talk about this. If you listen to the talk I did about Irenaeus' anti-Gnostic work against heresies, if you go listen to my Against Gnosticism talk, I outline like 10 things that set us off against the world religions and against the pagans and the Gnostics. So the zeitgeist shit doesn't work, dude, because literally we have multiple distinctives that no other religions have. And just saying that, well, there's another religion that has a similar idea of the gods birthing a world out of sexual intercourse, that's not creation. We don't teach that. And that's not similar. Well, there's a kind of weird triad in some religion I heard one time. The Vedic texts have a triad. That triad is nothing like what we teach. What we teach is nothing like a triad in Plato. It's not anything like it. As Basil says, the one is he, not it. All right, next we see that, again, this dialectic of perfection being unity is a philosophic assumption that is not, there's no self-evident truth to that. It's not self-evident that unity is somehow some higher ontological better state. On what basis? But as you see with all these guys who are especially Aristotelian, they've never thought to question paradigms and presuppositions. They don't know what you would think Aristotelians might know about what a transcendental argument is, given the fact that the metaphysics makes a transcendental argument, but they don't actually know about presuppositional thought and questioning presuppositions. And that's why they never win these debates. And they never will unless they start learning what I talk about. So we see the assumptions of neutrality. The assumptions of the idea that, well, we all know what existence is, right? So I can start by talking about everything exists, right? Everything that is exists. Oh, do we? Really? Now, in my worldview, everything that exists in this world is created. In your worldview, it's not. So existence itself is completely different from your view to mine. They're not univocal terms just because it's the same vowels coming out of our mouths. It's vastly different. Existence in Aristotle is not the same thing as what it means in Christian theology. For us, all that exists is made by God. And what does Paul say in Colossians? It's held in being. It subsists in the Logos. It's not pre-existing eternal matter. It's not prima materia. It's created matter, created forms that have their meaning and their grounding in the logi, the logoi, the logi, in the logos. Why is that? Because everything that exists in the world is triadic. From the Father, through the Son, and the Spirit. Everything. The world was created that way. Redemption happened that way. That's Basil's dictum. So being and existence are not self-evident terms that don't come theory-laden. They're not neutral terms that are self-interpreted. They are theory-laden terms and claims. He says being. I say, what do you mean? Created? Uncreated? They're not univocal terms. But every attempt to approach these goofy philosophical systems and import too much of them makes this mistake. I need to do a talk just on this and hammer it home. I'm going to call it Jerusalem versus Athens. So no Greeks taught creation. No Greeks taught that creation was a free act by a personal God. No Greeks taught that God is personal. For them, its ultimate reality is impersonal. Now, once any pagan has made this concession that ultimate reality is impersonal, they've already lost the debate. It's over, because it means that chaos ultimately is what rules and reigns. And you could say, well, it's not chaos, it's a bunch of abstract principles. Oh, no, wait a minute, a bunch of abstract principles can't string together all the different abstract principles to be coherent. How does the law of logic relate to the principle of love in the world? How do those two different things relate to the concept of a soul or a self? How do those three things relate to the concept of past, present, and future? They don't. They're just abstract categories that are placeholders in the system that don't really have any real relation to one another, unless we just assume that they do. But if there's an all-knowing, provident God who's omniscient, then he's the one who strings all these things together and holds them in being, as Paul says, and makes sense of all these different categories and gives us the possibility for them all relating in a meaningful way. The divine mind is needed then in this system to hold these categories together and to make sense of them. Now, as we move on to a little more difficult concepts in this. Now, by the way, we've come all the way up from the beginning of creation to man and the incarnation. Let's talk about the end of history as well, because the coming of Christ in history and the resurrection, that's the definitive signaling of the meaning of all of history, past, present, and future. So it's an eschatological. When Christ is resurrected, it's an eschatological event. I'm not saying there's not an end of the world. There is. But we are now living in the church age, the messianic age, right? And that same covenant has been open to the Gentiles. Point being, the body is good. In all these dumb Greek systems, the body's not good. Now, Aristotle tries to temper this, right? Aristotle doesn't have a problem with the body. So he departs from Plato's Gnostic nonsense. He says, hey, the body's not that bad, right? There's not eternal life in the body. You just kind of die, and then your monad soul seeds, they go off into another being that forms again, maybe something cyclical, right? We don't exactly know how this works, but, you go back into nature, and then nature forms another kid down the road, right? So there's not eternal life in this system. And there's not a God in this system that actually relates to the world. The God of Aristotle is thought thinking itself. Now, let's pause for a minute. Thought thinking itself, self-referential abstract thought, is the ultimate good and God here. Well, that sounds a lot like Greek philosophy, doesn't it? So Aristotle's God is just the personified Greek. It's just the ultimate idea of Greek philosophy. What's the highest possible goal? Well, it's like thinking, man. Well, what could be higher than thinking? Thought thinking itself, which is total nonsense. So anyway, again, it's a God who's not related to you. He's unknowable. He doesn't have any direct interaction in this world. He's either one unmoved mover or 55 unmoved movers. What similarities does that bear to Exodus 3:14? I am that I am. None. Is it true that God is the first cause and an unmoved mover? Yeah. But it's true because Christianity is true and that God is personal, not an impersonal abstract force. Now, why do all these pagans do this? I'm gonna get you. Here's the real secret to this. That's because, guess what? You're not accountable to a number. You're not accountable to gravity. You don't have to give an account of your life to gravity, to the number 7. So that's why they love abstract principles. But if there's a personal God, you got to give an account to your life, and you have duties and obligations and so forth. And there's a moral law that you have to follow, right? The 10 Commandments matter. In other words, it would require repentance. It would require a change of mind, metanoia, and a change of worldview. In this view, although it makes a big hubbub about telos, there's actually not an overriding telos. There's telos in objects. The acorn becomes the tree, right, in Aristotle and the four causes. But actually, in reality, that's just from the human vantage point. Do we know that an acorn really possesses telos in the overall universal scheme of things? No, we don't. So really, telos is a purely subjective human vantage point category for things. It's not a thing actually in things, because there's not an overriding telos to the universe. Now, later on, like Thomas, they will try to take the telos argument and make it into a teleological argument for all of reality. If you understand, you could make a transcendental telos argument. A transcendental form of the teleological argument would be valid. But the problem with just making a bare teleological argument assumes that telos is a self-evident, neutral, uninterpreted term, just like we saw earlier with being and existence, and it's not. So remember when I started quizzing, if you heard the debate, I started asking him, now wait a minute, so tell me how you got to this conclusion on your self-evident maxims. Which ones did you kind of build up on? Where does it start? And how do you start building the system? And what does he do? He appeals to things that he thought were just obvious and self-evident. Oh, but they are not. And that's the key. So when he starts talking about, I look out at the world and I start reasoning about the world. No, wait a minute, reason. And you look out at the world, so experience, sense data. And then he starts talking about the hylomorphisms out there in the world. Oh, wait a minute. Now you're bringing in new terms and ideas that you thought were just self-evident and obvious, but these are actually other ideas that are not yet vindicated or justified. So then he starts bringing in, I'm trying to remember the other things he started repealing to. He appealed to all these. Oh, he says, it's just part of being a human. Really? Human? You think that's a neutral term that doesn't come as in a theory-laden way? Human doesn't come to us as part of a worldview? It's a self-evident term and idea? No. What does human mean to me? It's completely different than what it means to the Aristotelian. To him, it's just a vegetative form that comes from natural processes and then disintegrates into dirt. For us, human means made in the image of God, a nature restored by the incarnation, and destined to live in all eternity with God. So completely different ideas about what human means. So human is not self-evident. And that's the root of this problem here, of all of these systems that are classical foundationalist, is that they all assume neutrality, and they assume that ideas, concepts, terms are theory neutral and system neutral and don't require interpretation. They're interpretively neutral. They're not. None of them are. Can't you see that? Again, nature. It's not self-evident to everybody what nature is, because it's going to be dependent on the rest of my worldview. What nature means. So he immediately starts on this spill of all of these different categories and concepts and very obtuse metaphysical baggage things that he acts like were just, it's obvious we know what existence is, right? It's the things that exist. What? No, it's not obvious, right? And so what happens, if he had been more schooled in philosophy and the history of philosophy, he would realize that actually, as philosophy developed, people begin to question those assumptions. Now, I'm not saying that Hume and these different Enlightenment characters are ultimately correct, but they are ultimately correct to, on the bases of classical foundationalism, start to question assumptions. and start to ask, hey, wait a minute, do we really know if existence is a theory neutral term? It seems to kind of go along with a bunch of other baggage in your philosophy. Oh, absolutely. Of course it does. This is why you can't appeal to some kind of generic being argument for God. You can't appeal to some generic telos concept, because telos is only possible if the God that we believe in exists. That's why this apologetic is better. It's a much stronger argument than the weak soy Thomist arguments. The 5 ways of soy. Those arguments are weak because they assume neutrality. They assume that beliefs and terms aren't theory laden. But guess what? They are. So being, human, nature, all these things he thinks he's appealing to that are self-evident, no, they're not. And I absolutely nailed him on that in the debate. In fact, he wasn't ready for that. He was all right, let's see. Being is not univocal. Existence, human, these terms are not self-evident. He says change and motion. Yeah, okay, so it doesn't make sense to say, I remember telos, that's what we're talking about. So telos isn't theory neutral. Well, it just means purpose. Yeah, purpose is not theory neutral. Obviously. And this is a key criticism of Aristotle himself. We're not talking about this guy, but let's look at Aristotle himself. If change and motion are eternal, well, actually, this is a good critique of the unmoved mover first cause argument. So if you reason back to why there has to be a first cause, no, there doesn't. And Aristotle's first cause is not the same thing as the Christian ex nihilo. So really, it doesn't work. Because if change and motion are eternal, then there is no beginning. Aristotle didn't think that the world had a beginning. It's eternal matter that's formed into the forms that are here presently. And so, in other words, you can't utilize Aristotle's 4 causes, because in Aristotle's system, when you reason back to the unmoved mover, there's no efficient cause. So Aristotle's argumentation is awful for apologetics. It's terrible. There's no efficient cause in the beginning on the part of the unmoved mover. Now, why do we say that? Because, again, what are the 4 causes? Material, and this would be like matter, prima materia, the substance, the stuffiness, right? The formal cause, right? This is what impresses the form that an object has. So we've got the clay. We stamp it with the rectangle, square. It's a brick. It becomes a brick, right? That's formal cause. The efficient cause is me doing it. The final cause is the telos. Now, the unmoved mover isn't really an efficient cause. I know that the Thomists want to make him that, but he's not really. Because there's not a beginning in this system. Because it's not creation ex nihilo. It's eternal matter being formed into something. That doesn't make any sense. Eternal matter being given form? That's a change in things. If there's a change in things, then there's not a beginning. There's not a beginning because it's eternal, you see. Eternal matter is changed. It's nonsense. There you go. And this is because, of course, in Aristotle, he wanted to deal with change and identity over change. That's a central problem in Aristotle. So there's not really an unmoved mover who can function as the efficient cause of things at the beginning of time. And there's no reason to assume by reasoning back through a chain of causes that there had to be one unmoved mover. Maybe there's 55 unmoved movers. See? And Aristotle contradicts himself on that point. So why would anybody would want to try to co-opt this argument? It's beyond me. It's dumb. There's not really telos in the world because there's not a singular divine mind that providentially orders and regulates and relates all things to each other. Therefore, telos cannot be applicable to the universe as a whole. It's a subjective human predicate of phenomena in their experience. For example, is 90 degrees a property in the object? For Aristotle, he has to say yes because of hylomorphism, because of objects being basically simple unities. 90 degrees is actually in that object? No, come on. And then when we think about more abstract mathematical things like Mandelbrot sets, oh, well, now wait a minute, where are they? Remember we wanted to squish everything in Plato's ideal realm into the here and the now, into the objects. Where is a Mandelbrot set out there in the world? Nowhere. So that doesn't work. And actually, in one of my grad classes, I had two grad Aristotle professors who were high level dudes, Dr. Robinson and Dr. Goggins. And under Dr. Goggins, I did a paper, and he specialized in a lot of these ancient mathematicians' theories on number. And so really high-level specialist dudes debate this problem in Aristotle in relationship to number. Because how do numbers actually only exist in particulars? Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make any sense. Because they don't. Because this is wrong. How are numbers only in particulars? Are Mandelbrot sets only in some particular out there in the world? That's retarded. 90 degrees is not just in your head, and it's not just an angle on an object, and it's not just a word. There's nothing in your brain that corresponds to 90 degrees. When you're speaking, I'm not talking about 98 degrees, the band. No boy bands here. I'm talking about 90 degrees on the edge of an object. So at this point, if we look at numbers in relationship to Aristotle, we're back at Plato. And again, this is a problem because for Aristotle, we're just kind of locating universals and abstractions in the particulars. He thought that would solve the issue. It doesn't. Another reason this doesn't work for us is, again, because of this starting point of it being classical foundationalism and ultimately appealing to sense experience. And that's why I asked this guy, how'd you come to the system? Oh, I read Parmenides and Aristotle and Confucius or whoever. So he, by his sense experience, read these books, and then he reasoned to these things about all this metaphysical stuff that he thought was self-evident. None of it's self-evident. We've shown that very clearly here. And so at this point, the system, I think, that he was presenting was just completely disintegrating and breaking down. And I don't think he was even catching the arguments and the force of the arguments. Next problem that we could see in Aristotle is ethics. Me and this guy, we didn't get to the ethical arm of debate, but I would have made the same type of argument if he had gone with the golden mean. The golden mean can't be a basis for ethics because the golden mean assumes that you have a basis to know what is in between two extremes. So just saying eudaimonia or golden mean, that doesn't work. How do you know what the middle is if you don't know what the extremes are? Obviously, come on. So it's subjective, it's relativistic. The Aristotelian God is ultimately deistic, so he's not an efficient cause. The Aristotelian God is unknowable. You don't have a relationship with him because he's thought thinking itself. He's not related to you. And thus, none of this works for intelligent design because the God in this system is unknowable, deistic, not related to this world, and he doesn't actually design this world. How dumb to try to co-opt this for intelligent design. If by intelligent design you mean not the orthodox doctrine of creation, maybe. The one and the many argument we got to, I argued that the Trinity is the only way to balance the one and the many. The triune God solves this problem of the one and the many. And he said, well, how can something be one and many at once? I said, well, have you seen numbers? Numbers are one and many at once. And there's nothing about a number that's more one than it is many or more many than it is one. A number can constitute a unity and a multiplicity at the exact same time in perfect balance. And that's an image, an analogy to the Trinity. It's not exactly the same as the Trinity. Nothing is. But it's an analogy. So telos didn't work. It's a human. Oh, that's right. Telos is, by the way, in Aristotle, an analogy on the basis of human architects, right? So if you have artificial objects in Aristotle, which would be like if you created a tool, right? It has a purpose. And so you've taken matter, you've stamped it with the form of a brick, and it becomes a tool to build the house, and you build the house out of the bricks. And so the brick thus has purpose. Okay, but in Aristotle's system, the world as a whole doesn't have that purpose because it's not created from the mind of a God who is providential, who directly relates to this world. No, he doesn't believe that. So telos does not work on a universal scale. Hylomorphism is absolute simplicity applied to objects in the world. It thus breaks down. It doesn't work as an epistemic system because our epistemology, I got into this with a little bit with the classical theist. When we reason about objects and we try to make sense of things in the world, in the Aristotelian scheme and in the Platonic, or in the Thomistic scheme to a degree, you have the idea that I abstract from the particular objects the phantasm in my passive intellect, and then from that I somehow know or have access to a universal. Doesn't work because no matter how many particulars you add up, you're not ever obtaining to universal, because the universals aren't just 5, 10, 20 particulars added up together. And the empiricists were right to critique this, because this system starts with empirical data and tries to reason up to universals. Not possible on this scheme. And you could say, well, yeah, but what about in the Thomistic scheme where the universals and the forms and the ideas of things are in the essence of God? Yeah, exactly. But what you're abstracting isn't the essence of God. And in this world, you never have access to the essence of God. You only have access to created likenesses, created analogies, analogia entis, or created effects. Never to the actual essence of God. So it doesn't work to ground knowledge in the divine ideas in the essence of God. It's self-refuting because of absolute not supposed to. Okay, I think I've hit all the problems in Aristotle and how it applies to dude's made-up pagan system. Okay, so I think that's pretty much most of what I wanted to get to. There's more areas in Aristotle that we can critique. My old notes, I've got problems. We already touched on the problems of a bunch of different trees. Don't get you the general form of a tree. Where do you ever get the general idea? You don't. Hylomorphism is absolute simplicity applied to objects. The ethics are not really ethics because we don't know what the golden mean actually is. It's just assumed. And then I don't care about Aristotle's polis. We're not going to go into that. So these are the problems that really sort of blatant problems in Aristotle. And although his system didn't have every aspect of Aristotle, it is good and still relevant to critique it and point it out. So that's the critique of Aristotle. In hour 2 of this for subscribers to today's analysis, I'm going to continue with a fuller critique of Aristotle. from my notes that are pretty extensive. And what we're going to do is go back once again, and we're going to look at the pre-Socratics and the Ionians, and we're going to trace this up through Aristotle, and we're going to talk again about how similar this is to the Far Eastern conceptions of monism and so forth. And I'm going to try to make it, you know, as accessible as possible for the subscribers, so it's not too obtuse. But since this is public, I wanted to address all the different possible objections that are out there. So hour 2 will again be a revisiting for subscribers, a revisiting of pre-Socratics, Ionians, Parmenides, and Aristotle, and how it contrasts with our worldview. So if you want access to that, go to Jay's Analysis, and you can subscribe at the subscription button there for the members' content. You get access to all the great archives and interviews over the years, countless talks now. There's a vast archive there of awesome stuff. All the Globalism book series, Tragedy and Hope, the Plato talks, all of the Republic, all the Bible talks. I mean, just a treasure trove of literal graduate level stuff in multiple subjects for $4.95 a month, $60 a year. All these people bitching about me. Do you understand the gifts that I'm giving you here? I'm not bragging about myself. It's all a gift from God, but I mean, you guys could be making use of this stuff. I just cover these subjects. I cover the books of the big boys. All right. Let's get down here to the super chats. And if you're ready for super chat time, send some super chats. Send me my super chats. We'll answer the super chats. So the gods, even in the most philosophic forms, these systems of the gods and we was Vikings, it boils down to these very simple problems of monism, of dualism, of dialectical tensions, one in the many. These same critiques, that's the point here. These same critiques are applicable to the pagans, to the Gnostics, to the atheists, to the materialists, to the Far Eastern mystics, Far Eastern religions, and to the goofballs in Philosophy 101 who think that the matrix simulation theory, it's all the same argument, bros. It's all the same nonsense. Hesher mentioned, all right, A.I. Howard, $5. Hesher mentioned Carnival the other night. Any analysis on that show in the future? Very Gnostic show indeed. I've heard about it, and I'll have to get to it. I haven't thought about it though. I have to get to that. My mind is getting tired, so I'm having a hard time talking. And yes, I'm going to put the debate. Let me just put it in there now, since people keep asking about it. And part of the reason I did this recap was, again, because the Discord audio kept cutting out after hour 2 when I was making my really nuclear arguments, my really based arguments. When it was getting pure fire is when, of course, Discord started messing up. So let me go to Daily Brap and let me pull up. It looks like it's still there. Somebody said they couldn't access it. No, it's still there. So I'm adding that to the... I think most of it you can hear. I haven't gone back and listened to all of it, but people were saying that it's pretty rough. You can kind of make out, now that you know what I'm saying here, and now that you've heard this, now you know what I'm getting at in my arguments, and you'll be able, if you want to go back and listen to the debate with understanding what I was trying to say, even though every time I would talk it would get cut off, now you could probably decipher through this Rosetta Stone what the heck I was trying to argue. So I put it in there, and then I'll put the debate. Here's the debate in the chat if you want it that way. Anthony Cavallo, $10. Gibbs for my Warrior King and Shiat. Thank you, Anthony. We appreciate that. But yeah, I'll check out Carnival, by the way. AI. I need to put that on the list, and I'll check that out. See if it's worthy of analysis down the road or something. John Sanford, $10. Vulcan, prayer, penguin, telescope, heart, punch, hang 10. Okay. Wizard, 5 New Zealands, 5 Enzies. You have an excellent taste in wigs. Well, thank you. Of course I do. What would you expect? Wizard, Enzies. You have excellent taste in wigs. Well, thank you for the extra Enzies. My eyes are burning. By the way, do you see how much of this is applicable to Thomism of what we talked about tonight? Spec 7 Re82, $4.99. Watching from 16 minutes behind, can you expand on how monism makes change illusory? You may have already covered it. Yeah, because again, I think if you're consistent, if everything is truly one, if the real reality that exists is one, right? This is Plato, many other religions and philosophies. Then when we look at this world, that's not just one, that's many things and there's change, the tendency is to say, or to try to explain change and distinction as illusory. And it starts by saying, well, if everything is ultimately one, then the problems that we have, man's problem is distinction, is being many, is interacting with other men. We all need to realize we're all one, man. So the assumption being that the problem of the world of mankind is metaphysical, and that problem is that being in a realm of particularity, of distinctions, of differences, is a lesser state of being somehow from this primitive, primordial, preeminent one, this preeminent unity, this great monad. This realm is typically seen then as lesser, a prison place, the creation of an evil demiurge, blah, 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 blah. A simulation, the Matrix, dude. Whoa. And so therefore, typically, if that's the case, then what is this world? Well, it's like a dream state. It's like an illusion. And if it's a dream state illusion, then you got to wake up. You got to get woke from, brah. Get woke from this dream state, brah. If you got to get woke from the Matrix, then the Matrix isn't real. Or at least not the really real, like the perfect monad, right? This underpins alchemy and Hermeticism. This underpins Baphomet. Because the original great monad, the great unity, is genderless and sexless. I'm not kidding. The occultists believe that. And so many of them actually believe that the erasing of the genders is an alchemical working. That's why the Baphomet symbol has both male and female organs. It's both and neither. So the great primordial unity was not male or female. Again, contrasted with Genesis. And guess what? Even some of the Eastern Fathers got that wrong. Gregory of Nyssa got that wrong. And St. Maximus corrects St. Gregory of Nyssa on that point. So even St. Gregory of Nyssa, for all of his amazing insights and argumentation, he didn't get everything right. That's why we don't go by one saint, right? He got it wrong about Genesis. He thought the fall resulted in the distinctions between male and female. But that's not what Genesis says. Yeah. So he was too influenced by Origen. He wasn't a heretic like Origen, but he was influenced by Origen. But it doesn't matter because we don't accept the opinion of every single church father. Nobody does. There's no person there's no religion or church or system on the face of the planet that actually does that. So it's stupid when people bring that up. Well, I found a church father who teaches this, so I could still hold that view. No, you can't. It doesn't work like that. So that's how change ultimately becomes illusory. And it's actually just a nonsensical statement to say that time is eternal, that the world is eternal. That doesn't make any sense. Because if it had no beginning, middle, or end, then again, the change that we're experiencing is actually not real. It's illusory. Because eternality is, in that view, static. If eternality is static and the one is eternal, and we're in the realm of change and flux, always moving, then change and flux and always moving are not real. Because eternality in the monad is what's real. So, this is why the Far Eastern religions are more consistent, and they say, yeah, exactly. That's why you got to wake up from this deceptive dream realm, which is an illusion, and get back to ultimate absolute. Get back to thusness. Get back to the great impersonal sea of being or whatever. Immerse yourself into the great ocean of non-being in the thusness. Orthonat, $20. Thank you, Orthonat. Yes, no, it's fine. I understand that you weren't trying to be gossipy, and no, I'm not in trouble with anybody. I attend a church that in good standing, and it is canonical, and I'm not going to say anything more than that. And thank you for the fan art. Appreciate that. Much appreciated. Mario Calabic, $5. My grandparents were Vikings. You are being offensive. Okay, well, you can be offended, bro. I know you're joking. But thank you for that, Marco. Jethro Tull, $15. Wow. Hope you guys are benefiting from that. Those are some fat super chats. Some super fats, PHAT. Misty Ernst, $1. Thank you, Misty. White Top, $2. Thank you, White Top. Lawrence Balanag, $2. Much appreciated, Lawrence. We always love seeing our usual friends, Jethro and Misty and White Top and Lawrence. NC Rid. Jay, you a big-brained cracker. Drew McMahon, thank you, NC. Drew McMahon, the father of Vince McMahon, $7. I'm a fan of you and Mr. Pajot. Why did you two not Jill? He seems to have wanted I don't think he wants a dialogue anymore. At one time he was open to that. But ultimately, I think we just decided that the approaches are too different, and I think I critiqued too many of the people that he regards very highly. Obviously, I wasn't intentionally critiquing them to get him mad or anything like that. It was just I critiqued the people that he regards highly, and that caused a problem. And then I think from there, we just decided that we have different approaches to things. So yeah, that just kind of fell through the cracks. So I don't think there's going to be. I mean, I'm open to talking to people, but I don't think he's interested in having a chat with me. And I'm not butthurt. That's fine. I don't have any harsh feelings or anything like that towards him. So that's what's up. Gabriel R, $5. Are thoughts logi, pre-existing patterns in the mind of God? Well, if you read the essay by Father Florovsky, which is really good, the logi have an uncreated and a created aspect to them. So the logi that are all one, the logos. If you read Ambiguum 7 by St. Maximus, he goes into depth about this, which is not very long. I think it's about 8-10 pages. It's a great chapter, Ambiguum 7. So there's a created and an uncreated aspect to them, and they are thought wills of God. They're not the essence of God. And Father Florovsky in his essay, Creation and Creaturehood, is what you must read. So read Ambiguum 7 of St. Maximus, and then read Father Florovsky's Creation and Creaturehood. That's one of the best treatments of the logoi, the logi I've ever seen. And it actually solved a lot of problems I had understanding it too. And there's other guys, Torstein Tollefson, and these guys have written a lot. Really fat, lengthy books on logi. So they are pre-existing patterns in the mind of God, but what's in our minds is not exactly the same as that, because our thoughts are created. So we have a created reasoning, we have a created energy. The noetic energy in our mind is created, but it is tapping into and it is reflecting something that's an uncreated energy. And so that's why for us, there are analogia, there are analogies. But the analogies, the analogia, contrasted to the Thomists and to the Roman Catholics, is not the essence of God. It's the uncreated energies of God. And so St. Maximus and Father Florovsky
And any of the Orthodox writers ever who've written on this will make great pains to point out that the logoi, the logi, are uncreated energies. And they're not the essence of God. They're not predeterminations that God had to create. They are thought wills of God and archetypes and patterns that he willed to do. So they're not the same as the essence of God, because if they're the same as the essence of God, then they must have been created and they are coterminous and eternal, which they are not. All right, let's see. Okay, I don't see any more super chats. Any more questions? I'm only going to read super chats because if I read people's questions from the chats, it's not fair to the people who super chatted. Some pretty gross questions in the chat. Gross. Moral Carks, $5. An Orthodox church recommendation in Nashville. I don't think there's a Rocor church. There's one in Tennessee somewhere, but it's a good drive from Nashville. I would not go to the Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Nashville because I asked if they accepted Freemasonry, and they said they do, so I would not go there. But I would you could check out the Antiochian Church in Franklin. Probably would be your best bet. The Antiochian Church in Franklin, Tennessee, which is right by Nashville. Franklin is right outside Nashville. So, all right. Thank you for that question there, Moral Carks. And thank you guys again. So the debate is here in the show description now. Good luck. If you want to try to decipher, you're welcome to. The first 2 hours, I think, are fine. So, like, if you listen to the first 2 hours of the exchange, my audio is good. It's just that third hour where it really kind of starts getting choppy. But with the Rosetta Stone that I just gave you in this talk, you should be able to decode the argument I'm making, and I think you'll see that it's a pretty strong argument. All right. Thank you, guys. God bless. If you want to hear more of this talk, I'm going to give you a more in-depth analysis of the pre-Socratics and Aristotle and monism and dualism in the Hour 2 chat this week for subscribers. And yes, we will do more of Julian Huxley. It's just that I got really bogged down in Julian Huxley is boring writing, man. It's boring globalism book. So I had to take a break this week, and we had these debates. So I thought revisiting Aristotle would be fun, more relevant. But yes, next week, the next talk after this, we will go back to the rest of Julian Huxley, and the next part of that book will be public, and then we'll do some more Julian for the subscribers next week. Thank you guys for listening. God bless. Have a good night.